It's theirs now. You're not allowed to show up." My daughter Caroline uttered these words as I held in my hands the key to the beach house, the same key I had carried in my purse for 40 years like a good luck charm. I was standing in the entryway of my own home, looking at my daughter who had just arrived with Patrick and his sister, Lauren. They came with serious faces, far too formal for a family visit. Caroline was wearing that green dress I had given her for her birthday, but now it looked like an executioner's uniform. "What are you talking about, honey?" I asked, although something in my stomach already knew the answer. I had noticed the strange looks in recent weeks, the conversations that would stop when I entered a room, the documents Patrick would quickly put away when I came near. "About the beach house, Mom," Caroline said with a voice that sounded rehearsed, as if she had practiced these words in front of a mirror. "We've already done the transfer. It belongs to Patrick's family now. They'll get more use out of it than you do." The key slipped from my hands and fell to the floor with a metallic clatter that echoed like a funeral bell. Patrick bent down to pick it up, but I was faster. I clenched it in my fist, feeling the cold metal warm with the heat of my contained rage. "My father left me that house," I murmured, my voice coming out hoarser than I expected. "It's the only thing I have left of him." "Mom, don't be dramatic," Caroline sighed, as if I were the one being irrational. "At your age, you don't need a beach house anymore. What do you want it for? To go stare at the ocean by yourself?" "It's sad, Mom. Very sad." Lauren nodded enthusiastically, as if my daughter had just said something profoundly wise. Patrick maintained that uncomfortable smile he always wore when he knew he was doing something wrong but had no intention of stopping. "Besides," Caroline continued, "we have 4 children, and they have grandchildren. The house will have life again. It will be useful. Not like now, when it's empty most of the year because you hardly ever go." I hardly ever go. That lie hit me like a slap. I went to that house every weekend, every holiday, every time the weight of loneliness became too heavy for my shoulders. It was my refuge, my place of peace, the place where I talked with my father's memories, and where I felt less alone in this world that seemed stranger every day. "The papers are already signed," Patrick added, speaking for the first time since they had arrived. His voice sounded almost apologetic, but his eyes had the glint of someone who had just won the lottery. "All legal, all in order. Don't you worry about a thing. Don't you worry." As if my worry were the problem here. As if my pain were a minor inconvenience to be resolved with reassuring words. "How?" was the only thing I could ask. "How did you sign the papers if the house is in my name?" Caroline and Patrick exchanged a look that lasted barely a second but told me everything I needed to know. There was something more, something they weren't telling me. "Well," Caroline said, fiddling with the handle of her purse, "technically the house is still in your name, but we have a power of attorney that you signed last year when you were sick, remember? We told you it was to help with the bank paperwork." My world came crashing down. I remembered that day when I had that terrible pneumonia and Caroline had come with papers saying it was to facilitate payments for my medicines and health insurance paperwork. I had signed without reading, trusting my daughter as I had trusted her my whole life. "You used my illness," I whispered, and it wasn't a question but a terrible confirmation. "Don't be melodramatic, Mom," Caroline replied impatiently. "We're helping you. At your age, having a property like that is a burden. Now you can live peacefully without worrying about maintenance, taxes, all those things you can't handle on your own anymore." "And?" Lauren smiled and put her hand on Caroline's arm in a supportive gesture. "Caroline is right, Mrs. Eleanor. You've already done your part. You raised your daughter. You've lived your life. Now it's time for the young people to enjoy what you've built." The young people, Patrick was 45 and Lauren was 42. I was 70, but I felt more alive than any of them. However, to them, I was a nuisance, an obstacle between their ambitions and my properties. "Mom," Caroline put her hand on my shoulder, and her touch burned like a hot iron. "Don't make that face. You know you can always come and visit us here. This is still your house. My house. This house where I had raised Caroline, where I had mourned for her father, where I had celebrated every one of her achievements and comforted every one of her defeats. Now they were offering it to me as a favor, as if I were a guest of their generosity." "I understand," I said finally, and my voice sounded so calm that even I was surprised. Caroline blinked, clearly expecting a different reaction. Patrick visibly relaxed. Lauren smiled in triumph. But I just smiled back, a small, quiet smile that seemed to say I accepted my fate with resignation. They couldn't know that this smile hid something completely different. "All right," I added, putting the key in my pocket. "If that's what you've decided, I suppose there's nothing more to talk about." The surprise on their faces was evident. They had come prepared for a battle, and I was giving them a surrender that seemed too easy. But 70 years of life had taught me that the most effective wars are the ones the enemy doesn't see coming. "They're moving in next Saturday," Caroline added, as if to make sure I fully understood the situation. Patrick already spoke with a moving company. "They're going to bring all their things early in the morning." I nodded slowly, maintaining that serene smile that seemed to reassure them so much. Inside, something was breaking, but it wasn't my heart. It was the last chain that bound me to naivety, to the belief that family always protects you, that a daughter's love is unconditional. "And my things?" I asked with genuine curiosity, as if it were a practical question with no emotional weight. "What things, Mom?" Caroline frowned, clearly confused by my calm demeanor. "Well, the house has furniture, decorations, my grandmother's china, the curtains I embroidered myself, the paintings." I listed them slowly, watching their expressions gradually change. Patrick cleared his throat. Well, we thought it would be easier if everything just stayed there, so the family can use the house immediately without having to buy everything new." Lauren nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, Mrs. Eleanor. It would be a shame to dismantle such a well-organized house. Besides, where would you put all those things? This house is already full." I looked around my living room, indeed filled with memories and objects accumulated over decades of life. But they didn't understand that every piece in that beach house had a story, had been chosen by me, paid for with my money, placed with my own hands. "You're right," I said finally, and I saw them relax again. "It would be complicated to bring everything here." Caroline smiled for the first time since she had arrived, a genuine smile that reminded me of the little girl she had been. "I'm glad you understand, Mom. I knew you'd be reasonable." Reasonable. That word echoed in my mind as I walked them to the door. I said goodbye to each of them with a kiss on the cheek, as if it were any other afternoon, as if they hadn't come to steal 40 years of memories from me. When they closed the door behind them, I stood in the foyer for several minutes, listening to the sound of their footsteps fading down the sidewalk. Then I walked to the window and watched them get into Patrick's car. Caroline turned once towards the house, and for a moment I thought she was coming back, that she had regretted it. But she just waved a casual goodbye before getting into the vehicle. I watched them drive away until the car disappeared around the corner. Only then did I allow myself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. But I didn't cry. Not yet. I walked to my room and pulled an old shoebox from under the bed where I kept my most important documents. With trembling hands, I searched until I found the deed to the beach house. The date clearly stated that the property had been transferred to my name on March 15, 1984, when my father died. 41 years of being mine. And now, the doorbell startled me. I quickly put the papers away and went to open it, hoping it was a repentant Caroline. But it was James, my lifelong neighbor, a 65-year-old man who had been my late husband's friend. "Eleanor," he said with obvious concern on his wrinkled face. "I saw Caroline and her husband were here. You looked very pale when you said goodbye to them. Is everything all right?" James had that special ability some older people have to read the pain in others' faces. We had shared decades of confidences over the fence that separated our houses, and he had known Caroline since she was a mischievous little girl who used to steal mangoes from his tree. "Come in, James," I said, stepping aside to let him in. "Do you want some coffee?" "Only if it's no trouble," he replied, but he was already walking towards the kitchen as he had done hundreds of times before. As I prepared the coffee, I told him everything. Every word, every gesture, every look. James listened to me in silence, nodding occasionally, his expression growing more serious with each detail. "That can't be legal," he murmured when I finished. "A power of attorney can't be used to transfer real estate without your explicit consent. How do you know that? When my sister died 3 years ago, I had to deal with all that legal paperwork. I learned more than I wanted to about inheritances and properties. He rubbed his gray beard thoughtfully. Eleanor, you need to talk to a lawyer. I shook my head. James, I'm 70 years old. Am I going to fight with my own daughter? Am I going to drag her to court? In the end, for what? So she'll hate me even more than she already seems to? She doesn't hate you, James exclaimed vehemently. Caroline is confused, manipulated by that husband of hers. But this isn't hatred, Eleanor. This is pure and simple greed. I served the coffee in the porcelain cups I had inherited from my mother, the same ones Caroline had used when she was little and came to visit after school, the same cups I had served hot chocolate in when she had nightmares and took refuge in my bed. Do you know what hurts the most, James? I asked, sitting across from him at the small kitchen table. It's not losing the house, although it hurts. It's discovering that the person I loved most in this world, the person for whom I would have given my life without a second thought, sees me as an obstacle. James reached out and covered my hand with his warm, calloused palm. Listen to me carefully, Eleanor. I knew Caroline when she was a little girl. I watched her grow up. I saw her cry when your husband died. I saw her hug you when you cried. That little girl hasn't completely disappeared. She's there, buried under the pressures of her marriage and her husband's ambitions. So, what do you suggest I do? James leaned forward, his eyes shining with a determination I hadn't seen in a long time. I suggest you don't give up so easily. I suggest that if they're going to take 40 years of your life, they should at least know the real price of what they're doing. I don't understand. Eleanor, James said with a mischievous smile. You said they can have the house, but you never said anything about everything that's inside it. I stared at him, processing his words. Slowly, an idea began to form in my mind. An idea that made me smile for the first time all afternoon. James, I murmured, I think you're right. Of course I'm right, he replied with a broader smile. I didn't get to be 65 by being a fool. Now, tell me exactly what's in that house that really belongs to you. I took out a notebook and started making a list. The furniture I had bought and paid for myself over all these years. My grandmother's china that I had brought there when my father died. The curtains I had embroidered over entire afternoons, stitch by stitch, the paintings I had bought on my travels, the bedding, the towels, the appliances, the books from my personal library, the plants I had cultivated with so much love. The list grew longer and longer. James nodded with each item, occasionally suggesting things I had forgotten. And don't forget, he said with a malicious glint in his eyes, everything you've put in to improve the house over these years. The air conditioning you installed last year, the bathroom upgrades, the kitchen you completely remodeled 5 years ago. He was right. I had invested not just money, but love in every corner of that house. And if Caroline and Patrick wanted the property, they would have to settle for what was legally theirs, 4 empty walls. But how am I going to get everything out without them noticing? Eleanor. James leaned back in his chair with a satisfied expression. That's what friends are for. And coincidentally, I know someone who owns a moving company. For the first time in hours, I laughed. A genuine laugh that came from deep within my chest. James, I said, squeezing his hand, I think Caroline and Patrick are in for a big surprise next Saturday. Oh, Eleanor, he replied, winking at me. You have no idea how big that surprise is going to be. That night, after James left, I stayed up late, refining the list and making plans. It wasn't revenge I felt, but something purer, justice. And for the first time since Caroline had spoken those terrible words, I felt in control of my own destiny. The next day, I woke up with a mental clarity I hadn't felt in months. It was Monday morning, and I had exactly 5 days to execute my plan before Patrick and his family arrived on Saturday to move into what they thought would be their new, fully furnished home. After breakfast, I dialed the number James had given me the night before. Frank, the owner of the moving company, turned out to be a man with a warm voice who listened to my situation with patience. Mrs. Eleanor, he said after I explained everything, James told me a bit about your situation last night. Don't you worry, we'll take care of everything. We can come tomorrow to do an inventory of what you need to move. Tomorrow? The speed surprised me. Of course, ma'am. Cases like yours, where there's, let's say, a certain family urgency, we handle with priority. Besides, James has been my best buddy for 20 years. Whatever he needs, he gets. That morning, I also called Caroline. My voice sounded casual, almost cheerful, when I asked if I could go to the beach house to pick up some personal things before Patrick's family arrived. "What things, Mom?" she asked with some suspicion. "Just a few little things, honey. Some photographs I have there, my medication I left in the medicine cabinet, maybe some clothes. I don't want the new occupants to feel uncomfortable finding my things around." Caroline relaxed immediately. "Oh, of course. How considerate of you, Mom. Go whenever you want. Just let me know so Patrick doesn't worry if he sees movement at the house." How considerate I am, I thought as I hung up the phone. If only she knew how considerate I was truly being. On Tuesday morning, Frank arrived promptly with his team. He was a burly man in his 50s, with huge hands that were surprisingly delicate when handling objects. He was accompanied by his 2 sons, Toby and Isaac, strong and polite young men who treated me with a respect I hadn't received from my own family in a long time. The drive to the beach house took 40 minutes. During the entire trip, Frank told me stories of complicated family moves he had handled over the years. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said as he drove along the coastal highway, "you're not the first older person to go through this. Families sometimes forget that parents are not just obstacles to an inheritance, but human beings with rights and feelings." When we arrived at the house, I felt a pang in my chest. There was my refuge, with its white walls shining under the morning sun, the pink bougainvillea I had planted 10 years ago climbing up the fence, the small garden I tended with so much love every weekend. I opened the door with trembling hands. The familiar scent hit me immediately. The mix of sea salt, the fabric softener I always used, and that particular smell of home that is only achieved after decades of love invested in a place. "My goodness," Toby murmured as we entered the living room. "This is beautiful, Mrs. Eleanor." He was right. The living room was the result of years of patient searching in flea markets, antique stores, and travels. The 3-piece sofa in cream fabric, which I had bought with my first paycheck as a retired teacher. The carved wooden coffee table I had found in a small coastal town. The hand-painted ceramic lamps I had brought back from a trip. The embroidered cushions I had made during rainy afternoons. "Let's start by making an inventory," Frank said, taking out a notebook. "I want you to tell me exactly what you're taking and what's staying." We started in the living room. Every piece of furniture, every decoration, every object had its story, and more importantly, its purchase receipt saved in the box of documents I had brought with me. Frank took pictures of everything while his sons measured and calculated the necessary space in the truck. "And this?" Isaac asked, pointing to the air conditioner. "It's coming with me," I replied firmly. "I had it installed last year. I have the invoice." Frank nodded. "No problem. Toby is a refrigeration technician. We'll uninstall it without damaging anything." We moved on to the kitchen. The stove, the refrigerator, the microwave, the complete set of dishes, the utensils, all had been purchased by me. Even the improvements I had made. The custom-made wooden cabinets, the backsplash tile I had personally chosen, the breakfast bar I had added 3 years ago. "Ma'am," Frank said with genuine admiration, "you turned this house into a real home." In the dining room, the situation was the same. The 6-person table I had inherited from my mother, the chairs I had restored myself, the sideboard where I kept the fine glassware, the linen curtains I had embroidered for months. We went up to the bedrooms. In the master bedroom, my king-size bed with its green velvet upholstered headboard, the matching nightstands, the dressing table with a mirror that had belonged to my grandmother, the dresser full of bedding I had collected over the years. "Mrs. Eleanor," Toby touched my arm gently. "It's okay." I realized I had been standing motionless in front of the dressing table mirror, remembering all the mornings I had combed my hair there, all the nights I had taken off my earrings after happy days at the beach. "Yes, son, I'm just remembering." In the guest room, we found more treasures. The single bed with its hand-knitted quilt, the desk where I used to sit and write letters, the library full of books I had accumulated over decades. The bathroom had been completely remodeled by me 2 years ago. The tiles, the shower, the sink, the mirror with an LED light, all of it was mine. "Is this going too?" Isaac asked, pointing to the tiles. Everything, I confirmed. I have all the receipts. Frank whistled softly. Ma'am, when we're done here, this house is going to look like it was just built. Bare walls and nothing else. Exactly as it should be, I replied with a smile that surprised me with its coldness. We went out to the garden. My plants, my pots, the garden furniture, the grill, the decorative lights I had hung for the romantic evenings I would no longer have but had imagined for so many years. The plants too? Toby asked with curiosity. Especially the plants. Some of them I brought from cuttings from my mother's house. They're over 20 years old. At the end of the day, the list filled 12 pages of Frank's notebook. Practically everything that gave life and personality to that house belonged to me legally. When can we start? I asked. Tomorrow morning, Frank replied. But we need 3 days to do all this without damaging anything. It's a lot of dismantling and packing. Perfect, I said, mentally calculating. That leaves us with Friday for the final cleaning. Final cleaning? Isaac asked. Yes, I replied, and this time my smile was genuinely malicious. I don't want anyone to say I left this house dirty. When Patrick and his family arrive on Saturday, they are going to find the cleanest house of their lives. So clean they'll be able to see their reflections in every empty surface. Frank laughed heartily. Mrs. Eleanor, I like you a lot. It will be a pleasure to work for you. That night, back at my house, I called Caroline to inform her that I had gone to pick up some things. Everything okay, Mom? She asked me. Everything's perfect, honey. I picked up what I needed. The house is ready for Patrick's family to arrive. I'm glad to hear you're being so cooperative, Caroline said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. Cooperative? If only she knew how cooperative I was truly being. After hanging up, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in my garden to watch the stars. For the first time in days, I felt at peace. This isn't revenge, I told myself. It's simply justice. And after 70 years of being the woman who always gave in, who always forgave, who always put others' needs before her own, I was finally doing something just for me. On Wednesday, the most satisfying move of my life would begin. Wednesday dawned clear, as if even the weather was conspiring in my favor. Frank and his team arrived at 7 in the morning, punctual as promised. They brought a huge truck and professional tools that immediately reassured me. Good morning, Mrs. Eleanor. Frank greeted me with a smile. Ready to start? More than ready. I had been awake all night, not from nerves, but from a strange excitement I hadn't felt in years. It was as if after decades of living on autopilot, I had finally taken control of my own story. We started in the garden. Toby and Isaac worked with surprising delicacy, digging up each of my plants as if they were archaeological treasures. The begonias I had grown from seed, the rose bushes I had transplanted from my mother's house, the succulents I had traded with other neighbors over the years. Ma'am, Toby told me as he carefully wrapped the roots of my favorite jasmine. These plants are beautiful. You can tell you've taken care of them with a lot of love. 20 years taking care of them, I replied, stroking the silky leaves of the jasmine. Some of them know me better than my own family. While they worked in the garden, I dedicated myself to packing the most delicate items in the house. Every photograph, every memory, every little treasure I had accumulated over 4 decades of happy summers. At noon, Caroline called me. Mom, how are you doing with your things? Very well, honey, I replied as I watched Frank carefully dismantle my air conditioner. I'm just picking up a few personal odds and ends. Don't take too long, okay? Patrick wants to stop by tomorrow to check that everything is in order for Saturday. Perfect, I thought. Tomorrow, Thursday, we would finish taking everything out, and on Friday, we would do the final cleaning. Patrick was in for an early surprise. Don't worry, Caroline. I'll be done by tomorrow. When I hung up, Frank looked at me with a conspiratorial smile. Your son-in-law is coming tomorrow? Yes, to inspect his new property. Excellent timing, Frank murmured. By tomorrow afternoon, this place will be impeccable. Empty, but impeccable. The rest of Wednesday passed like a perfectly choreographed ballet. The boys dismantled the master bedroom furniture with a precision that left me in awe. Every screw, every piece, everything was labeled and packed with professional care. By the end of the day, the house already looked dramatically different. The spaces that had once been full of life and color now showed rectangular marks on the walls where my paintings had hung, the empty spaces where my furniture had been. "We'll finish tomorrow," Frank assured me as they closed the truck. "And on Friday, if you like, we can come back for the final cleaning." "Yes," I told him, looking at the empty windows of my old house. "I want it to be perfect." Thursday was a bittersweet day. Seeing them dismantle the kitchen I had designed with so much love broke my heart, but at the same time, I felt a strange satisfaction watching each piece of my life being carefully packed and protected. Isaac turned out to be as skilled at dismantling the backsplash as his brother was with the plants. "Don't worry, Mrs. Eleanor," he told me as he removed each tile with surgical precision. "We can reinstall this wherever you want." By 3 in the afternoon, the transformation was complete. The house that had been my refuge for 40 years was now just an empty structure with bare walls and carpetless floors. "Are you sure this is what you want to do?" Frank asked me, and for the first time since this adventure began, I detected a note of concern in his voice. "Completely sure," I replied, and I was surprised by the firmness of my own voice. At 4:30, as we were loading the last boxes into the truck, I saw Patrick's car turn the corner. My heart raced, but not with fear, with anticipation. "Ma'am," Toby whispered to me, "that's your son-in-law." "Yes," I replied, smoothing my blouse and running my fingers through my hair. "I think he's a little earlier than expected." Patrick parked in front of the house and got out of the car with that arrogant confidence that had always bothered me. He was dressed as if for an important real estate inspection, with a freshly pressed white shirt and dress pants. "Eleanor," he greeted me with evident surprise. "I didn't know you were still here." "Hello, Patrick," I replied with my sweetest smile. "I was just finishing up, picking up my last things." His eyes moved to the moving truck, and then to Frank and the boys, who had stopped their work to watch the interaction. "Movers?" he asked with a nervous laugh. "Why do you need a moving company for a few personal things?" "Well," I said slowly, savoring every second of his growing confusion, "it turned out I had more personal things than I remembered." Patrick frowned and walked towards the entrance of the house. I followed him along with Frank, who clearly didn't want to miss the show. When Patrick opened the door and entered the living room, his face was a symphony of emotions. First confusion, then gradual understanding, and finally a mixture of shock and rage that gave me immense satisfaction. "Where is everything?" he asked in a choked voice. "Everything what?" I replied with angelic innocence. "The furniture, the decorations, everything that was here." "Oh, that," I said as if I had just realized. "Those were my personal things, the ones I came to pick up." Patrick looked at me as if I had lost my mind. "Eleanor, those weren't your personal things. They were the house's furniture." "They were my furniture," I corrected him gently. "I bought them, I paid for them, I took care of them for years. I have all the receipts if you want to see them." Frank stepped forward, his imposing presence filling the empty space. "Sir, everything Mrs. Eleanor took is duly documented. If you want to check the receipts—" "You can't do this," Patrick shouted, his voice echoing strangely against the bare walls. "This is our house now. Everything that was here was included." "Included in what?" I asked with genuine curiosity. "As far as I know, Caroline only informed me that you had taken possession of the house. No one mentioned anything about its contents." Patrick took out his phone and dialed frantically. "Caroline!" he yelled when she answered. "Your mother completely emptied the house. She took everything, everything." I could hear Caroline's high-pitched voice on the other end of the line, but not the exact words. Patrick paced in circles in the empty living room, gesturing wildly. "No, you don't understand," he yelled into the phone. "There's nothing left, not even the air conditioner. The walls are bare." Frank winked at me. Toby and Isaac watched from the door, clearly enjoying the drama. "Yes, she's right here," Patrick said, thrusting the phone in my face. "Talk to your daughter." I took the phone calmly. "Hello, Caroline." "Mom, what did you do?" Caroline's voice was hysterical. "I picked up my things just like I told you I would." "But Patrick says there's nothing left." "Well," I said thoughtfully, "I guess that means everything that was in the house was mine. How interesting." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Caroline spoke in a controlled but furious voice. "Mom, that's not fair. We were counting on the house being furnished." "And why were you counting on that?" I asked with genuine curiosity. "When you took the house without consulting me, did you also invent that all my belongings belonged to you?" Patrick snatched the phone from me. "Caroline, you have to do something. The family arrives on Saturday. We can't host them in an empty house." While he continued his frantic conversation, I calmly walked out of the house. Frank and his sons had already finished loading the truck. "Mrs. Eleanor?" Frank asked. "We'll come back tomorrow for the cleaning." "Of course," I replied, taking one last look at the house where I had been happy for so many years. I want it to be impeccable for the new tenants. As I got into the car Frank had brought to take me back, I could see Patrick still gesturing in the empty living room, his agitated voice echoing throughout the house. For the first time in weeks, I laughed genuinely. "Ma'am," Frank told me as he started the car, "you are my new hero." That night, Caroline arrived at my house like a hurricane. She didn't ring the bell. She used her key as she had done for years. But this time, her entrance wasn't that of a daughter coming to visit her mother, but of a furious woman coming to confront her enemy. I found her in the living room, standing in the middle of the space with her arms crossed and an expression I had never seen on her face. It was as if the mask of the respectful daughter had finally fallen completely. "Mom," she said, her voice trembling with contained rage. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I sat calmly in my favorite armchair, the same one where I had cradled her as a baby, where I had read her stories as a child, where we had talked about her boyfriends as a teenager. "I'm protecting what's mine," I replied in a calm voice. "What's yours?" Caroline exploded. "Mom, you are being selfish. A selfish and spiteful old woman." The words hit me like slaps, but I maintained my composure. 70 years of life had taught me that people show their true character under pressure. "Selfish?" I repeated softly. "I'm selfish for protecting the things I bought with my own money, that I cared for with my own hands for decades?" "You knew perfectly well that we were counting on the house being furnished," she shouted, starting to pace back and forth like a caged animal. "You knew Patrick's family is arriving on Saturday." "Yes, I knew," I admitted. "I also knew that you took my house without consulting me, using documents I signed when I was sick and vulnerable." Caroline stopped in her tracks. For a moment, something like guilt crossed her face, but it was quickly replaced by more rage. "That was for your own good. At your age, you don't need a beach house." "At my age," I repeated slowly, savoring the phrase I had heard so much in recent days. "Tell me, Caroline, at what exact age does a person stop deserving their own possessions? At what age do they become a burden to their children instead of being their mother?" Caroline looked at me with shining eyes full of tears that seemed more of frustration than sadness. "Don't be dramatic, Mom. No one said you were a burden." "No?" I slowly stood up from my armchair. "Then explain to me why my own daughter conspired with her husband to take away the house I love most in the world. Explain to me why you didn't consult me. Explain to me why you used my illness against me." "Because we knew you would object," Caroline shouted, and the truth finally came out. "We knew you'd be impossible and would make 1,000 excuses." Excuses. The word came out like a venomous whisper. Defending my property would be an excuse. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Caroline and I looked at each other, both surprised by the interruption. I went to open it and found James standing on my doorstep with a worried expression. "Eleanor," he said, glancing towards where Caroline was visible from the entrance. I heard shouting. "Is everything all right?" Diana appeared behind me. "Hello, Mr. Anderson," she said with a forcedly sweet voice, trying to compose her mask of the perfect daughter. But James had known Caroline since she was a child, and he wasn't easily fooled. He greeted her with obvious coldness. "It's been a while since I've seen you around here." "Yes, well," Caroline shifted uncomfortably. "I've been busy. Busy taking your mother's house, from what I hear," James said bluntly. Caroline's mask cracked again. "That's none of your business, Mr. Anderson. When someone is shouting in the house next door, it does become my business. James replied, entering without being invited and clearly positioning himself on my side, especially when those shouts are directed at a woman who has been my neighbor and friend for 30 years. Caroline looked at me as if I had betrayed some family secret by telling James what had happened. "Mom, you told our private business to the neighbors?" "I told my friend that my daughter stole my house," I said with brutal simplicity. "We didn't steal anything," Caroline shouted, completely losing control. "The house is still in your name. We're just using it." "Using it," I repeated, "and forbidding me from showing up." James whistled softly. "Caroline, my girl, I carried you on my shoulders when you were 5 years old. I taught you how to ride a bike when your father was working. I comforted you when your first boyfriend broke your heart. But this," he shook his head in disgust, "this is not the girl I knew." Caroline turned to James with flaming eyes. "You don't understand the situation." "I understand perfectly," James replied in a grave voice. "I understand that a 70-year-old woman who spent her life sacrificing for her family is being punished by that same family for the crime of getting old." "That's not true." "No?" James crossed his arms. "Then explain to me why your mother can't use her own house." Caroline opened her mouth to answer, but no sound came out. For the first time since she had arrived, she seemed to truly see what she was doing. It's just, she stammered. "Patrick's family is large, and they need." "And your mother doesn't need?" James interrupted. "Your mother doesn't deserve to enjoy what she built with her work? She's already lived her life." Caroline exploded, and those words hung in the air like a death sentence. James and I were silent, processing what she had just said. Caroline seemed to immediately realize the enormity of her words, but it was too late. "Caroline," I said softly, "do you really think I've already lived my life? That at 70 years old, I no longer deserve moments of happiness?" Caroline started to cry, but they were not tears of remorse but of frustration. "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" "I meant that. She wiped her tears brusquely. "That we have children to raise, a future to build. You've already raised your daughter. You've already built your life. And now it's my turn to step aside so you can build yours on the remains of mine," I finished for her. "Yes," Caroline shouted, then covered her mouth, horrified by her own honesty. James put a protective hand on my shoulder. "Eleanor," he said without taking his eyes off Caroline, "I think you've heard everything you needed to hear." Caroline stood up straight, trying to regain some dignity. "Mom, you can still fix this. We can reach an agreement. You can come visit us at the house a few times a year, when Patrick's family isn't there." The generosity of her offer left me speechless for a moment. My own daughter was offering me crumbs of my own property, as if it were an extraordinary favor. "You know what, Caroline?" I said finally. "You're right about one thing. I have already lived my life of sacrifice, of putting others before myself, of accepting crumbs with gratitude. I have lived that life completely." Caroline smiled, thinking she had won. "But now," I continued, "I am going to live a different life. A life where I do not allow anyone, not even my own daughter, to treat me as if I were a piece of old furniture that's in the way." The smile vanished from Caroline's face. "So no, I'm not going to fix anything. The furniture, the decorations, everything I took out of that house stays with me. If you want the house, you can have it, but you're going to have it exactly as you deserve it. Empty." Caroline looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and rage that broke my heart, but I didn't back down. "You are a cruel and vengeful woman," she told me, her voice trembling. "No," I replied. "I am a woman who has finally learned to defend herself." Caroline stormed out of my house, slamming the door so hard it shook the windows. James and I stood in the silence that followed, processing what had just happened. "Eleanor," James said after a moment, "are you okay?" I thought about his question as I watched from the window as Caroline drove away in her car, probably back to Patrick to plan their next move. "You know what, James?" I said finally. "I think for the first time in a long time, I am perfectly okay." And it was true. My heart ached for the break with Caroline, but for the first time in years, I felt completely in charge of my own life. Friday dawned with a strange tranquility. I had slept better than I had in weeks, as if I had finally put a heavy burden down after carrying it for a long time. Frank and his sons arrived early, as promised, to do the final cleaning of the house. "Good morning, Mrs. Eleanor," Frank greeted me with a smile. "Ready for the grand finale?" "More than ready," I replied, getting into the truck with an energy that surprised me. The drive to the beach house was in comfortable silence. Toby and Isaac were softly humming a song, and Frank drove with a professional calm that reassured me. When we arrived, the house looked exactly as we had left it the day before. Empty but strangely dignified, like an elegant woman who had decided to strip off all her jewelry but still held her head high. "Where do we start?" Isaac asked, taking the cleaning supplies from the truck. "Wherever you want," I told them. "I just want that when we're done, this house is cleaner than it has ever been." No. It wasn't revenge I felt as the boys began to work. It was something deeper, more ceremonial. It was as if I were preparing the house for a final farewell, to close a chapter of my life in the most dignified way possible. We started with the windows. Toby had a special technique that left them completely transparent, without a single streak. While he worked on the glass, Isaac and I cleaned every inch of the walls, removing the marks left by my paintings, the prints of my hands, the stains of the years. "Mrs. Eleanor," Isaac said to me as he scrubbed a particularly stubborn mark, "doesn't it make you sad to do this?" I stopped my work and thought about his question. "You know what makes me sad, Isaac? It's not cleaning these walls. It's discovering that the person I loved most in the world saw me as an obstacle to her happiness." The boy nodded seriously. "My grandmother always says that children forget that parents have hearts too. Your grandmother is a wise woman. We cleaned the kitchen with obsessive care. Every remaining cabinet, every surface, every corner. Frank took care of cleaning the marks left by my appliances, and when he was done, the kitchen looked brand new. "Look at this," Frank said to me, pointing to the bare walls. "You can see exactly where everything was. It's as if the house is a ghost of what it used to be." He was right. The rectangular marks on the walls where my paintings had hung, the cleaner spaces on the floor where my furniture had been, it all created a ghostly map of the life that had existed there. At noon, as we were cleaning the master bathroom, I heard the sound of a car arriving. I peeked through the window and saw Patrick's vehicle parking in front of the house. This time he wasn't alone. Caroline was with him, and I also recognized Lauren in the back seat. "The family has arrived," I announced to Frank. "Do you want us to stop?" he asked. "No," I replied firmly. "Let them see us working. Let them see the care with which I am leaving their new house." The three of them got out of the car with serious expressions. Patrick had that rigid posture he adopted when he was trying to control his temper. Caroline avoided looking directly at the house, as if she were ashamed to be there. Lauren, on the other hand, observed everything with ill-disguised curiosity. They entered without knocking, as if it were already their right. I heard them walking through the living room, their footsteps echoing in the empty space in a way they surely had not anticipated. "Oh my God," I heard Lauren exclaim. "She really took everything." "I told you," Patrick muttered. "Even the curtains." I continued cleaning the bathroom mirror, watching their reflections as they walked through the house. Caroline seemed to get smaller with every room they checked. Finally, Patrick came upstairs. I heard him enter the bathroom where we were working. "Eleanor," he said in a controlled voice, "we need to talk." I turned to face him, still holding the cleaning cloth. "Of course, Patrick. How can I help you?" "This is ridiculous," he said, gesturing at the bare walls. "You can't just take everything and leave us with an empty house." "Why not?" I asked. Everything I took was mine. "But we were counting on it. And I wasn't counting on keeping my house," I retorted softly. Patrick opened his mouth to reply but was left speechless. Behind him, Caroline appeared in the doorway. "Mom," she said in a pleading voice, "please, we can fix this. We can reach an agreement." "What kind of agreement?" I asked, without stopping my cleaning. "You can keep some of the furniture, the most important pieces to you. We'll buy the rest. And you can come to the house, say, 1 weekend a month." The generosity of her offer would have made me laugh if it hadn't been so pathetic. My own daughter was negotiating my access to my own property as if it were an extraordinary privilege. "No," I said simply. "No?" Patrick looked genuinely surprised, as if the word didn't exist in his vocabulary when addressed to me. "No," I repeated, turning to face them. "I am not going to negotiate for crumbs of what was mine. I am not going to accept condescending favors from people who stole my sanctuary." "We didn't steal anything," Caroline shouted, but her voice sounded more desperate than furious. "No?" I took the documents I had brought out of my purse. "Here is the power of attorney I signed when I was sick. Can you show me where it says you could use this document to transfer my property?" Caroline and Patrick exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Furthermore," I continued, "here is my will, drafted 5 years ago. Can you show me where it says I wanted to leave this house to my son-in-law's family instead of my own daughter?" "Mom, that's different." "Different how?" I interrupted. "You took something that didn't belong to you, using documents fraudulently, without my consent. In any court in the country, that's called theft." Frank, who had been cleaning quietly, straightened up a bit upon hearing this. Toby and Isaac had stopped working and were watching the confrontation with obvious interest. "Are you threatening to sue us?" Patrick asked in disbelief. "I'm not threatening anything," I replied calmly. "I'm stating facts. You committed fraud. I am protecting what legally belongs to me." Lauren, who had been quiet until then, finally spoke. "Mrs. Eleanor, you are being very unreasonable. We are family." I turned to her slowly. "Lauren, when your brother and my daughter conspired to take my house, where was that family consideration? When they decided I was too old to deserve my own possessions, where was the family respect?" Lauren blushed and looked down. "Family," I continued, "is supposed to protect you, not take advantage of you when you're vulnerable." Caroline started to cry, but this time her tears seemed genuine. "Mom, I didn't want it to be like this. I just thought it would be better for everyone." "Better for everyone," I repeated softly. "Or better for you?" Caroline couldn't answer. Frank cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said with respect but firmness. "But we need to finish our work, Mrs. Eleanor hired us to leave this house spotless, and that's what we're going to do." Patrick looked at him with irritation. "And who are you to get involved in this?" "I'm someone who respects their elders," Frank replied without flinching. "Something you clearly need to learn." The comment landed like a slap. Patrick turned red with rage but didn't dare confront Frank, whose imposing presence filled the entire bathroom space. "Let's go," Patrick said to Caroline. "This is useless." As they were leaving, I heard Caroline whisper, "Mom, is there really no way to fix this?" I stopped my cleaning and looked her directly in the eyes. "Yes, Caroline, there is a way." Her eyes lit up with hope. "Give me back my house," I said simply. The hope vanished from her face. Without another word, she followed Patrick down the stairs. I heard them leave, their muffled voices arguing in the car before they drove away. When the sound of the engine faded, Frank put a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said, "you are the bravest woman I have ever known." I smiled, feeling a strange peace wash over me. "I'm not brave, Frank. I'm just tired of being invisible." Saturday arrived with a crystal clarity that seemed to mock the storm that was brewing. It was 9 in the morning when James knocked on my door with a mischievous smile I hadn't seen on his face in years. "Eleanor," he said, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee, "would you like to join me for a drive this morning?" "What kind of drive?" I asked, although I already suspected the answer from the glint in his eyes. "The kind of drive that casually takes you through the beach area," he replied with false innocence. "To see how the traffic is, the road conditions, that sort of thing." I couldn't help but smile. "James, you are a terrible man." "I am a curious man," he corrected me. "And after everything you've been through this week, I think you deserve to see the end of this story." He was right. After 4 days of moving, confrontations, and exhaustive cleaning, I needed to see how this play I had been unwittingly directing would end. The drive to the beach was in comfortable silence. James drove with the patience of someone who has learned to enjoy the journey as much as the destination. When we reached the residential area where my old house was, we parked at a prudent but clear viewing distance. "There it is," James murmured, pointing towards the house that looked perfectly clean and completely empty through the uncurtained windows. We didn't have to wait long. At exactly 10:30, a caravan of 3 cars began to arrive. The first was Patrick and Caroline's. The other two were loaded to the brim with suitcases, boxes, and what appeared to be the first desperate attempts to get last-minute furniture. "Is that the whole family?" James asked, as we watched a group of about 12 people get out of the cars. "I suppose so," I replied, recognizing some of Patrick's siblings whom I had met at weddings and birthdays over the years. The first sign that something was wrong was when Patrick opened the front door, and the group stood motionless on the threshold. From our position, we could clearly see through the bare windows how the first people who entered stopped abruptly, as if they had hit an invisible wall. "Where's the furniture?" we heard an older woman, whom I recognized as Patrick's mother, shout. "Eleanor took it," came Patrick's voice, clearly audible in the quiet morning. "Who's Eleanor?" a younger voice asked. "My mother-in-law," Patrick explained with evident bitterness. James and I exchanged amused glances. Apparently, Patrick had not prepared his family for what they were about to find. For the next 20 minutes, we witnessed a spectacle that oscillated between comical and pathetic. Patrick's relatives went in and out of the house with growing expressions of confusion. Children ran through the empty rooms, their shouts and laughter echoing strangely in the spaces, without carpets or curtains to absorb the sound. "Patrick!" shouted a woman who appeared to be his older sister. "You told us the house was fully equipped?" "And it was," Patrick replied defensively. "My mother-in-law emptied everything, and you couldn't stop her?" There was a long silence, during which presumably Patrick was trying to explain how he had lost a battle against a 70-year-old woman. "This is incredible," James murmured with admiration. "You're going to let them sleep on the floor?" "Not all of them," I replied. "I saw they brought some sleeping bags in one of the cars." We watched as Lauren led a group of children to the backyard, probably to get them away from the emotional chaos unfolding inside the house. The adults formed what looked like a war council in the empty living room, their voices rising and falling in what was clearly a heated argument. "What are we going to do for food?" we heard someone ask. "There's a grill in the backyard," Patrick answered hopefully. "With what charcoal?" another voice asked. "With what plates? With what silverware?" The silence that followed was eloquent. "I think," James said, holding back a laugh, "your son-in-law didn't think this plan through very well." At 11:30, we saw Patrick run out to his car. He returned an hour later with the vehicle full of bags of what appeared to be emergency purchases: disposable plates, plastic cups, a small portable grill. "Oh, Patrick," I murmured, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and pity. "This is what happens when you count your chickens before they hatch." At noon, the heat began to intensify. The house, without air conditioning, became apparently unbearable. We watched them open all the windows and doors, trying to create some kind of cross breeze. "Without the curtains you sewed," James observed. "That house must be an oven right now." He was right. I had designed the curtain system specifically to block the midday sun that mercilessly entered through the west-facing windows. By 1 in the afternoon, we saw the first group of deserters. 2 couples with small children packed their things and left, clearly unable to stand the conditions. We heard them arguing with Patrick before they left, their voices filled with frustration and reproach. "They're leaving," I observed. "The smart ones always leave first," James commented wisely. Caroline appeared at the front door, talking agitatedly on the phone. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in her posture, the way she gestured with desperation. "I bet she's trying to get rental furniture," James said. "On a Saturday, with this urgency," I replied. "It's going to be very expensive, if she can even get anything." At 2 in the afternoon, a truck from a furniture rental store arrived. My hopes that Caroline had managed a quick solution faded when I saw what they unloaded. A few plastic folding chairs, 2 card tables, and what looked like some inflatable mattresses. "That's not going to be enough for even half the people," I observed. "No," James agreed, "and it's going to cost a fortune for a week." Sure enough, half an hour later we saw more people packing up and leaving. By 3 in the afternoon, only Patrick, Caroline, Lauren, and what appeared to be Patrick's parents remained 2 older people who looked clearly uncomfortable in the plastic chairs under the relentless sun. "The old folks are always the last to leave," James murmured. "They don't want to admit the plan failed." At 4, even Patrick's parents had had enough. We watched them load their suitcases with expressions of clear disappointment and frustration. "Patrick," we heard his mother shout, "the next time you invite us somewhere, make sure you actually have a suitable place to host us." When they left, only Patrick, Caroline, and Lauren remained in the empty house. From our position, we could see them sitting in the plastic chairs in the middle of the living room, surrounded by the few possessions they had brought for what was supposed to be a triumphant family vacation week. "Do you know what the most ironic part of all this is?" I asked James. "What?" "That if they had come to talk to me like adults, like family, I probably would have been willing to share the house for a few seasons, but they decided to take it by force." James nodded. "Pride and greed make people make the stupidest decisions." At 5 in the afternoon, as the sun began to set and the temperatures became more bearable, we finally saw decisive movement. Caroline came out of the house and began to load the few things they had brought back into the car. "They're giving up," James announced with satisfaction. "Already?" I asked, feigning surprise. "But it's only their first day in their new vacation home," James laughed. "Eleanor, you're diabolical." "No," I replied, watching as Patrick helped load the last bags, his defeated posture evident even from a distance. "I'm a woman who finally learned that sometimes justice comes in unexpected forms." When the last car drove away from the empty house, James and I sat in silence for several minutes, processing what we had just witnessed. "And now what?" James finally asked. I looked at the house that had been my refuge for 40 years, now empty and abandoned like a theater after the final performance. "Now," I said slowly, "I begin the next chapter of my life." The days following the great family weekend fiasco were strangely quiet. Caroline didn't call, didn't visit, didn't send any messages. It was as if she had decided I had ceased to exist, just as she had decided I no longer deserved my own house. But I was not idle. On Monday morning, Frank arrived at my house with a proposal that would change everything. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said as we had coffee in my kitchen, "I've been thinking about your situation. What are you going to do with all the furniture we took out of the beach house?" It was a good question. My furniture was stored in a warehouse Frank had arranged, waiting for me to decide what to do with it. My current house was already complete, and it made no sense to crowd decades of memories into a space that couldn't contain them. "I don't know," I admitted. "I suppose I'll have to sell some things." "Sell them to whom?" Frank asked with a smile that made me suspect he had something in mind. "I don't know. To people who need used furniture. How about to people who need furniture urgently?" His smile widened. "People who, let's say, just moved into an empty house and discovered they have nothing to fill it with." I stared at him, processing his suggestion. "Frank, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that you have something they desperately need, and they have something you might want." "What do they have that I could possibly want?" "Your house back," he said simply. The idea was so bold that I was speechless for several minutes. Frank waited patiently while I processed all the implications. "But how?" I finally asked. "Easy. You sell them the furniture, but with conditions. The price includes not only the furniture, but also the right to shared use of the house." "Shared use?" "Yes. Let's say they can use the house during the summers, and you use it for the rest of the year. Or you can split the weekends. The details can be negotiated." "But Frank," I protested, "that house is already mine. Why would I have to negotiate the use of my own property?" "Because," Frank said with a pragmatism I admired, "sometimes it's better to win the war bit by bit than to lose all the battles trying to be completely right." His words gave me pause. He was right in a way. I could continue to be the right but rejected grandmother, or I could be the clever grandmother who found ways to reclaim some of what she had lost. "And what if they don't accept?" I asked. "Mrs. Eleanor," Frank leaned back in his chair with confidence, "after what they witnessed on Saturday, they will accept anything you offer. They're desperate." That afternoon, against all my instincts, I called Caroline. "Mom?" Her voice was cautious, as if she wasn't sure whether to hang up or listen. "Caroline," I said in the most neutral voice I could muster. "I heard the weekend didn't go as you expected." There was a long silence. Finally, Caroline sighed. "No, it didn't go well." "Do you want to talk about it?" "What for, Mom? So you can say, 'I told you so'?" "No," I replied honestly. to see if we can find a solution that works for everyone. Another long pause. What kind of solution? Why don't you come to the house tomorrow? We can talk like adults. Are you going to yell at me? The question broke my heart. Caroline, I have never yelled at you in your life. I know, she murmured. I was the one who yelled at you the other night. Yes, I confirmed softly. You were. On Tuesday afternoon, Caroline arrived at my house with the attitude of someone going to the dentist, necessary but painful. She looked tired, older, as if the last few days had taken a heavy toll on her appearance. Hi, Mom, she greeted me with a small voice. Hello, honey, do you want some coffee? Yes, please. I prepared the coffee in silence while Caroline sat at the kitchen table, in the same chair where she had eaten breakfast for years as a child. For a moment, I could see the little Caroline in her adult face, vulnerable, insecure, needing guidance. Caroline, I said after serving her cup, tell me what really happened on Saturday. Caroline sighed deeply before she began. It was a disaster, Mom, a complete disaster. She told me about the humiliation of having to explain to Patrick's entire family why the house was empty, about the children complaining of the heat, about the adults asking why she hadn't warned them about the conditions, about the astronomical cost of renting emergency furniture that wasn't even enough. Patrick's mother told me I was the most irresponsible hostess she had ever met, Caroline concluded with tears in her eyes. And she was right. Was she right? I asked gently. Yes, Mom. I should have known you can't offer something you don't have. Caroline, I said carefully, you knew I had furnished that house over decades. Did you really think that furniture was automatically included with the property? Caroline was quiet for a long moment. I guess I never thought about it. To me, the house had always been furnished. I just assumed it was part of the house. As if I were part of the furniture? I asked, but without sarcasm, with genuine curiosity. Caroline looked at me with tear-filled eyes. Mom, I never wanted to hurt you. I genuinely thought it was for the best for everyone. The best for everyone, I repeated. Or the best for Patrick and his family? For everyone, Caroline insisted, but her voice didn't sound convincing even to herself. Caroline, I said, leaning forward, do you know the difference between what you did and what I did? She shook her head. You took something that wasn't yours, without asking. I protected something that was mine. You acted in secret. I acted openly. You assumed I had no rights. I exercised the rights I legally have. Caroline nodded slowly, as if she were finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what she had done. Is there any way to fix this? She asked in a small voice. Maybe, I replied, but it's going to require all of us to be honest about what we really want and what we're willing to give. What do you mean? I mean, you obviously need furniture for that house, and I have exactly the furniture you need. Caroline's eyes lit up with cautious hope. But, I continued, I am not going to give it to you for free, and I am not going to accept being excluded from a house that is still legally mine. What are you proposing? I will sell you all the furniture I took out of the house, but the price includes something more than money. What else? Access, shared use of the house, a calendar where we can divide the time fairly. Caroline frowned, clearly trying to process the proposal. How much money? She finally asked. $50,000, I said, naming a figure that was fair but significant. Caroline choked on her coffee. Mom, that's a lot of money. Caroline, I told her calmly, it's less than what new furniture of that quality costs. It's less than what Patrick will spend trying to furnish that house from scratch, and it's less than what you'll spend on hotel rentals if you don't have a decent place to host your family. Caroline did the mental math, and I could see the exact moment she realized I was right. And the shared use? 6 months for you, 6 months for me, or we can split the weekends, or any arrangement that is fair to both parties. Caroline was quiet for several minutes, clearly debating internally. I have to talk to Patrick, she said finally. Of course, I replied. But Caroline, this offer has an expiration date. If I don't receive an answer by Friday, I'm going to sell the furniture to someone else, and you can fend for yourselves. Would you really do that? Caroline, I told her, looking her straight in the eye. After everything that has happened, do you really doubt that I would do exactly what I say I'm going to do? For the first time in the entire conversation, Caroline smiled. A small but genuine smile. "No," she admitted. "I don't doubt that anymore." When she left, I sat in my kitchen, wondering if I had done the right thing. It wasn't the perfect justice I perhaps deserved, but it was a step towards reconciliation without completely sacrificing my dignity. For the first time in weeks, I had hope. On Thursday night, Caroline called me. "Mom," she said with a voice that sounded different, more mature. "We accept your proposal." I felt a mixture of relief and satisfaction that I hadn't anticipated. "All the terms?" "All the terms. Patrick will transfer the money tomorrow, and we want to talk to you about the shared use calendar." "Very well," I replied, keeping my voice neutral despite the emotion I felt inside. "When do you want Frank to bring the furniture back? Would Saturday be okay? Patrick's family wants to try the weekend again." I laughed softly. "Of course, Caroline, but this time they're going to have a very different experience." On Friday morning, the money appeared in my bank account. $50,000 that represented much more than the monetary value of my furniture. It represented the price of my dignity, the cost of being taken seriously, the fee for having learned to defend myself. That afternoon, Caroline and Patrick came to my house to discuss the calendar. Patrick looked uncomfortable, like a child who has been forced to apologize after breaking something valuable. "Eleanor," he said as he entered, I want to apologize for how we handled this whole situation." "How you handled it, Patrick?" I asked, wanting to hear him say the words. "I handled it badly," he admitted, looking at the floor. "We shouldn't have used the power of attorney that way. We shouldn't have assumed the furniture was included. We shouldn't have excluded you from your own house." "No," I agreed, "you shouldn't have." We sat in my living room and spread a calendar over the coffee table. For the next hour, we divided the year in a way that gave each family equitable access to the beach house. "The summers will be shared," I stated firmly. "1 week you, 1 week me. The winters will be mostly mine, because you prefer tropical vacations anyway." Caroline nodded. "That seems fair." "And," I added, "when either of us has guests, the other party will have at least 2 weeks' notice." "Agreed," Patrick said, and for the first time since I'd known him, his agreement sounded genuine. On Saturday morning, James and I returned to the beach house, but this time not as spies, but as part of the official process. Frank and his sons were already there, carefully unloading every piece of furniture, every decoration, every piece of the life that had been torn from those walls. "Mrs. Eleanor," Toby told me as he carried my favorite sofa, "it feels good to bring these things back to their home, doesn't it?" "Yes," I replied, watching as my house slowly came back to life. "It feels like it's breathing again." Caroline arrived mid-morning with coffee and pastries for everyone. It was a small but significant gesture. For the first time in weeks, she seemed like the daughter I had raised instead of the stranger who had shown up to rob me. "Mom," she told me as we watched Isaac reinstall my air conditioner, "do you think we can ever go back to being a normal family?" "Caroline," I replied, hanging one of my favorite paintings in its usual place, "we were never a normal family. But maybe we can be an honest one." By noon, the house had been completely restored. Every piece of furniture in its place, every painting on its wall, every plant in its pot. It was as if the last 2 months had been just a strange nightmare. "It's beautiful," James murmured, observing the fully furnished living room. "It's hard to believe it was ever empty." Patrick arrived with his family just as Frank was finishing the final adjustments. This time, when they entered the house, their expressions were of genuine amazement and gratitude. "Oh my goodness!" exclaimed Patrick's mother, the same woman who had made such harsh comments the week before. "This is absolutely perfect." The children ran to the garden, exclaiming with delight at the sight of the restored plants and garden furniture in its place. The adults settled comfortably on the sofas, commenting on the quality of everything, the attention to detail, the warmth of the space. "Eleanor," Patrick's father told me, "your house is beautiful. Thank you for sharing it with us." For sharing it. Not for giving it to us. Not for letting us use it. For sharing it. Those 2 words made the difference between humiliation and respect. That afternoon, while Patrick's family was settling in for their weekend, Caroline and I walked along the beach. It was the first time in months we had been alone without tension between us. "Mom," Caroline told me as the waves lapped at our bare feet, "I learned something important from all of this." "What did you learn?" "I learned that treating someone as if they're invisible doesn't make them disappear, it just makes them stronger." I smiled, feeling the sea breeze caress my face. "That's a valuable lesson, honey." "I also learned," Caroline continued, "that my mother is much smarter and more resilient than I thought." "I was always smart and resilient," I replied softly. "I just never had to prove it so dramatically." We walked in silence for several minutes, listening to the eternal sound of the waves. "Do you forgive me?" Caroline finally asked. "I've already forgiven you," I replied. "But forgiveness doesn't mean I forget. It means I trust that you've learned from your mistakes." "You trust me?" "I'm learning to trust you again," I said honestly. "But, Caroline, if something like this ever happens again, I won't be so generous next time." Caroline nodded seriously. "It won't happen again, Mom. I promise." End quote. That night, James and I had dinner at the small seafood restaurant we had frequented for years. We toasted with white wine as the sun set over the sea. "To battles well fought," James said, raising his glass. "To lessons well learned," I replied, clinking my glass against his. "Do you know what the most interesting thing about this whole situation is?" James asked. "What?" "That in the end, everyone won something. Caroline learned to respect her mother. Patrick learned that actions have consequences. You got your dignity and your house back. And the family has a beautiful place to vacation." "And what did you win?" I asked with curiosity. James smiled with that mischievous grin I had grown to love. "I won the satisfaction of seeing my favorite neighbor defend herself like the warrior I always knew she was." A month later, I was sitting on my favorite terrace at the beach house, reading a book while the morning sun warmed my face. It was Tuesday, my day, my time, my peace. I heard footsteps on the sand and looked up to see an older woman walking along the beach, exactly as I used to do before all this drama began. She looked alone, but not sad. She looked free. She reminded me of myself a few weeks ago, when I thought my life of adventure was over, that my role had been reduced to being an obstacle to the ambitions of others. I stood up and walked towards the shore. "Good morning," I called out to the woman. She approached with a smile. "Good morning. Are you the owner of that beautiful house?" "I am one of the owners," I replied, and the words tasted like victory. "Would you like to come in for a coffee?" "I would love that," she responded. As I prepared coffee for two in my fully restored kitchen, I thought about everything that had happened. Caroline was right. I had learned that I was stronger than I thought. But I had also learned something more important. I had learned that it is never too late to write a new chapter of your own story. I had learned that dignity is not something others give you, but something you decide to keep. And I had learned that sometimes the best revenge is not the pain you cause others, but the happiness you decide to create for yourself. I served the coffee in the porcelain cups I had inherited from my mother, the same cups Caroline had used when she was a child, the same ones I would now use to welcome new friends into my reclaimed home. "So," I said to my new friend as we sat on my terrace, "tell me about yourself. Are you enjoying your freedom?" She laughed. "How did you know I was free?" "Because," I replied, raising my cup in a silent toast to the infinite sea, "I recognize a woman who has finally decided to live for herself. And so, sitting on my terrace, in my house, on my time, with the sea stretching endlessly before me, I knew that I had done more than just get my furniture back. I had gotten my life back."